Hello and welcome to the President's Podcast right here on the record with the Ohio Senate. The views the news excludes. I'm John Fortney, the Director of Communication with the Senate Republican Caucus, the Majority Caucus in the Ohio Senate. Great to have back on the program Senator Rob McColley from the 1st District in Napoleon, Ohio. Welcome back.
Thanks. Happy to be here, John.
You know, kind of a tough week this week, really for a legendary lawmaker, very well known in Canton, Ohio, the late Senator Kirk Scheuring, who served in both chambers, and really honored week, honoring his remarkable legacy with him lying in state in the State House Rotunda. The special session of remembrance that the Senate held, and of course his state funeral held in the State House, in the atrium of the Ohio State House. On the floor of the Senate, you called him a mentor and a legend, and also a legislator's legislator. Mm-hmm. Your memories of Kirk Scheuring?
Well, I mean, he was somebody who embodied, really, when you think of the institution of the Ohio General Assembly, Kirk Scheuring pops into your mind. I mean, he's somebody who embodies all the great traits that you would hope to have in a legislator, somebody who always put his nose to the grindstone and didn't care who got the credit, was willing to work through incredibly complicated issues and always did so and found a solution at the end. And somebody who another person said was down here to put the work in and not just make statements that are going to get him clicks or social media. I doubt he even had social media. The big thing was Ohio is worse off without Kirk Scheuring in the legislature. And I think that became apparent from the remarks that were made and also the feelings that were felt in the room as we were discussing his legacy. And his legacy will be rich, quite frankly. Across the state, some of the different legislation he's worked on has improved the lives of many people, but especially locally in Canton and Stark County. There's a lot of things that he's done that will continue to benefit the people of his district for decades.
I know Stephanie Kunze, Senator Stephanie Kunze from Central Ohio, said that she remembered him telling her that the legislature, the General Assembly, needed more statesmen and less statement makers. Mm-hmm. And he was really all class. He had just a unique way, a calm way about him, and he really did mentor a lot of the freshman lawmakers who, and you have a lot of that now because of term limits. How do you think that mentoring and having that type of veteran lawmaker who takes the time to go, all right, I know this is what you want to do. I know you think you can get this done, but there is a process of building consensus, and you have to get through two chambers and the governor.
Yeah, and I think it shows how much he cared about the institution, the fact that he was willing to spend all that time with new legislators. I can speak for myself personally, and it wasn't just the time that he spent with me trying to say, hey, well, maybe you should go about it this way, maybe you should do it that way. It was also the example that he set. The thing I always used to give him credit for, he would run our caucus meetings in the House when I was in the House before I came to the Senate. And the funny thing was he was always so prompt. He respected everybody's time. He started on time. He tried to finish his meetings on time, etc. And when a conversation had gone on too long, Kirk would always just say, all right, we've heard enough. If you want to vote no, vote no. We've got the votes already. Let's move on. And I always respected that about him. And whenever we would start session late or whenever we'd start a meeting late or something like that, I would always go to him and smile and say, Kirk, we need to run this like you ran your caucus meetings. And he would say, absolutely, we need to start on time. So yeah, a lot of fond memories with Kirk.
Absolutely. I've heard him say that in caucus meetings before. Yeah. Absolutely, Mr. President. Also, part of the mentorship, when you have somebody that takes that kind of time with freshmen and young lawmakers, you never know who's going to be the next member of leadership, who's going to be the next Senate president. Senator Rob McColley will be the next president of the Ohio Senate at the start of the 136th General Assembly. What's it like knowing that you've been a member of leadership, but being the next in the incoming Senate president, what is that like?
Well, it's an incredible honor, and it's almost one of those things that you have to reflect on after the election and say, this is an incredible honor. It's an incredible opportunity, and it's also very humbling that your entire caucus would place their trust in you, like they have, and so it comes with a lot of responsibility. And so we've already worked through some of the decision making that has to go into beginning a new General Assembly, getting things set up, and so we can hit the ground running. But it's just, the responsibility is great, and it's something I'm really looking forward to.
Did you ever see yourself as the next leader of either the House chamber or the Senate chamber, a legislative chamber, when you were in college? Is that something that you aspired to or thought would be cool?
Well, not when I was in college, or law school for that matter. When I came down to the legislature, I really got into the House. I'm like, look, if I put my nose to the grindstone and I really do good work, maybe by my fourth term in the House, I can be a chairman and, then ride off into the sunset. And of course, the Lord had other plans. I wound up in the Senate in my third year in the legislature, ended up getting appointed. And, thankfully, I've had the opportunity to do a lot of great things with our members and put myself in a position to now lead the chamber going into next year.
Yeah, you have the confidence of the caucus, of the members, and of course, a strong leadership team as well. Senator Bill Reineke, Senator Teresa Gavarone, and Senator George Lang. Talk a little bit about your leadership team. They come with vast experience in business, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I think that needs to be a focus going forward, is that Ohio, I believe, is at a point where we can really put our foot on the accelerator to make Ohio a better place to live, work, and raise a family. And I think the best way to do that is really make it a great place for people to invest in their businesses and their communities. And we need to be mindful of that. We need to be mindful of the regulatory burdens and the hurdles we put in front of people and their businesses and how they live, work, and raise a family here in the state. But we also need to be mindful of the fact that, look, sometimes the private sector, we just need to get out of the way. And I think people understand that, especially when they've lived through those decisions in their own businesses and when they've actually confronted the government in their lives on a daily basis, trying to, get a piece of them here and a piece of them there. Business leaders understand that. And of course, Senator Reineke's name is well known in his district as, not just a businessman, but a businessman that's well respected in his community, who gives back to his community and understands the importance of doing the right thing. And same thing with Senator Gavarone and Mr. Spots. I joke with her. I patronized Mr. Spots long before I ever knew Teresa Gavarone, when I would visit my friends at BGSU. Same thing with George Lang. He's had an awful lot of success himself. So they'll bring a unique perspective that I think will help inform a lot of our decisions.
As a business major, we always talked about how consumer spending was 2/3 of the economy. Well, small business and consumer spending in small businesses in Ohio, and those independent businesses are a huge part of Ohio's economy and employing people. Small businesses, in many ways, would you agree, the backbone of Ohio's economy?
Yeah, absolutely. They may not get the headlines of an Intel project or a Honda plant or anything like that. But the small businesses are what's going to make or break not only the state economy, but also your community. And those are the ones that oftentimes, when I was in economic development prior to joining the legislature, the thing we like to focus on is, look, it's always great to bring in a new company. It's always great to bring in somebody who's going to, build a new facility or whatever the case may be. But the vast majority of your growth and in employment and investment is going to be from your existing business, retaining those businesses and trying to make sure that they have the resources they need to thrive. And so small business owners obviously understand that as well as anybody. So looking forward to working with them going forward.
I haven't had you on since the November election and the nearly 8-point defeat of State Issue 1. You really led the charge on that early, especially with the effort to outlaw foreign funds, millions of dollars from foreign contributors that were directed and flowing into these issue campaigns because Ohio's Constitution is such an easy target. Your thoughts about the overwhelming and sweeping defeat, maybe the message that Ohio voters sent about this whole idea of gerrymandering and redistricting?
So I think the people who backed that measure honestly thought we can throw $20 million at anything in Ohio and pass it. I think in some ways they were insulting the intelligence of the voters going forward and just basically saying, look, it doesn't matter if we go for broke in this and, basically rig this whole system with no accountability. If we throw enough money at it, it'll pass. Thankfully, the voters saw through that and saw that it was basically a scam to install a system that the other side would basically be in charge of with no accountability. To the point where even when I was talking with Democrats, and I had a PowerPoint slide that occasionally I would bring up in front of groups, and I would put up the plain language of the ballot in a measure. And I would say, Section 8 says that you can't file a claim in any court for constitutional violations. Ask yourself, why would they put that in there? And even Democrats would say, well, why would we vote for this? This is awful. It is trying to rig the system. And so, I think hopefully the folks who backed that learned their lesson that, you can't just throw things at the wall and see if it's going to pass. Also, I think, the people on the no side ran a good campaign. I don't want to discount that. That doesn't happen without people leading it. President Huffman, of course, was very instrumental in that. The governor coming out against it was very instrumental. It gained us a lot of credibility, I think, that he would take such a firm stand. And then, of course, President Trump calling it what it was, a way for the Democrats to rig the elections in their favor, or rig the redistricting in their favor. It was a team effort, and it was a team win for our side. And hopefully it'll send a message to those groups that, if you're going to come back to Ohio and try to put something on the ballot, it needs to be something that is actually good for Ohio.
We had Bob Paduchek and Frank Strigari on the most recent podcast, and Bob was talking about how he thinks it's going to be well over $40 million total that the Issue 1 campaign will wind up spending when the final reports will be in. It's amazing how it started off as $20 million with some of the interviews that we did with you, and you pointed out about the foreign funds and how they got all their money in right before the law was going to take effect that you sponsored that would ban the foreign contributions because they're already banned. You can't have foreign money coming in to a candidate campaign. And all you wanted to do was align the law, and then the Democrats said, well, it doesn't happen. We don't need this. The law passes, and then lo and behold, the Mark Elias law firm that represents the NDRC, and this campaign for that matter, they filed a lawsuit saying this is an unconstitutional law. Well, why would you have to challenge the law if you weren't using foreign funds? Do you think it'll be well over $40 million? That's a lot of money for a losing campaign to spend.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think our side ended up maybe raising $6 million or $7 million, somewhere around that area, maybe less. And so being outspent by that much and still the no side prevailed shows you how bad of a ballot initiative this actually was. But it also shows the brazenness of the other side to think that it doesn't matter what's on the ballot initiative, we can just throw an unlimited amount of money at this thing.
And 99, I calculated it, and I think maybe you did too, 99.7% of their funds of that, we'll call it $40 million campaign, was from out of state, dark money, secretly funded money coming from out of state, California, DC, New York, Washington, So their effort to say that they were running a grassroots campaign was a complete lie.
It was a complete lie. Absolutely.
As we move forward too, from Issue 1 and we move into the next General Assembly, you talked about President Huffman. Well, he's going to be the next Speaker of the Ohio House once that's all official. What type of General Assembly do you think that we will see with a Speaker Huffman President McColley. I know I've said I think you're going to see the most, if not one of the most effective and efficient General Assemblies in decades that really work for the people.
Yeah, well, not only do President Huffman and I get along pretty well, but ideologically we're pretty closely aligned. And so I would imagine, to your point, there's going to be a lot of legislation that maybe has had some trouble in the past, or maybe there's been some communication barriers between the chambers, to put it mildly, that are now no longer going to be an issue. And I also think he and I are both people where we don't care who gets the credit. We don't really, care to grandstand or anything. We just want to get the work done. And so I look forward to the process with him and empowering the members in both chambers to really get to work on behalf of Ohioans.
Well, let's face it, at the start of every new General Assembly, which will be in the odd year is when you have three budgets that you have to work on. The most notable two, of course, are the transportation budget and the operating budget. And the operating budget, there's a ton of work that goes into that, because you're talking about everything from tax policy to the next phase of school funding, to other policy that is also becomes part of the budget bill. What's your message about taxes? Because the income tax has been dramatically reduced even since I've worked here. When I think I started here, there were 9 income tax brackets in the state of Ohio. Now there are only 2. Talk to us a little bit about where you stand on tax policy.
The tax policy in Ohio, when I joined the legislature 10 years ago, was completely broken. In some ways, we still have some work to do. But to your point, there were way too many brackets. The high brackets were way too high. There were an awful lot of times where, when I was in economic development before joining the legislature, where companies would come in and say, when it comes down to Ohio versus these other states, we're simply not going to choose Ohio because of their tax environment and because of the fact that we're going to be taxed too much. And it's not just the state taxes. It's a layering of taxes even at the local level that just make the burden way too high. And so we don't hear that anymore, thankfully. And I think that's because of the fact of the work that we've done in the legislature to systematically and over the course of time chip away at that and get rid of brackets. I know in our caucus there's a desire to go from 2 brackets to 1 bracket, also known as a flat income tax that many other states enjoy, and have seen that translate into an awful lot of economic growth, both from companies within and companies outside coming in and wanting to invest. But there's other tax elements, too, that we need to take a look at. We took a big chunk out of the commercial activities tax, which is my least favorite tax, by the way, because it's a gross receipts tax. You don't even have to make a profit in your business, and the state of Ohio is going to come in and take a piece out of your business as far as the revenues. And so that's something that I would like to see at some point, if we can afford to do it, continue to chip away at that, potentially eliminate it. Because, frankly, if you're losing money in your business, you shouldn't be paying taxes on the revenue. And that's always been a position of mine over the course of time. Thankfully, in recent budget cycles, we've saw fit to begin chipping away at that and moving towards eliminating that as well.
School funding as well. Certainly in the last budget, in the 135th General Assembly, an additional $1 billion was invested into K through 12 public schools. Whatever the next phase, I think we're in the 3rd year of the Fair School Funding Plan. You still hear the far left and the Coalition for Equity and Adequacy in School Funding declaring that the school funding system was ruled unconstitutional. The school funding system is completely constitutional, has not been unconstitutional since the state Supreme Court in the early 2000s released the case. Your message on school funding, where it stands now, and are schools getting enough money?
I think it's interesting that occasionally you'll have groups bring up that the school funding in Ohio is unconstitutional based on a case 20 years ago, and the fact that we've probably had 10 different iterations of school funding since then. The school funding plan has completely changed since then, so you can't say that it's unconstitutional now just because it was back then. So that we'll start with that. We've made record investments in public education basically every budget cycle. And to your point, in some cases, over $1 billion more put into our school systems. It's remarkable the amount of money we put in, and in fact, it's greatly exceeded the rate of inflation over the course of time just that I've been in the legislature. And so I think the public needs to realize that. And as much as school districts in some cases will say, oh, well, we're not getting adequate funding from the state, it's record investment.
Look at their 5-year forecasts for a lot of these districts.
And it's greatly exceeding the rate of inflation, the increases they've gotten. I would anticipate there's probably going to be another increase in school funding in the upcoming budget. But I think as well, there will probably be conversations going forward as property taxes have become such a hot topic as to how school districts are using levies in some ways outside the original intention of those levies to really kind of have their cake and eat it too. And I would imagine that's going to be a conversation going forward in the legislature as well.
Well, you put your finger on it. I mean, the income tax burden from the state level has been greatly reduced over the last decade. But a lot of the rancor and outrage about why the property valuation came out and I got this huge increase and the pushback and the phone calls that were coming to legislative offices, well, maybe homeowners, property owners, much like we heard in the special committee on housing, the select committee on housing that did statewide hearings, we heard a lot of that, about the affordability of housing. Well, that's when you go to your city council meeting. That's when you go to your school board meeting and you ask those questions about, now, how much is the millage raising and what exactly are you spending it on and why are you asking me for another 10 mills?
It's safe to say, and you could ask your auditor, your county auditor, your county treasurer, whenever you see your property taxes go up, let's say your property taxes go up in a year $500 or so, it's safe to say that the majority of that is going to your schools, no matter what. And it'll be varying percentages depending on how the millage is set up and the levies that are on and everything like that. But it's interesting to me that many of these school districts across the state of Ohio have gone to their voters asking for new levies after property tax increases have gone in place because of the revaluations, which, we need to take a look at some of that stuff too. And in some cases, they're shocked that the levies have failed. And the question needs to be asked in many cases, of that increase, how much more of that money is going to the school district? And if that's the case, why are they going to the ballot so quickly to ask for another levy or an increase in funding even above and beyond that? It's not to say they wouldn't have a good reason. They may very well have a good reason why they did that. But it's a complex thing that most voters, I think, may not be as aware of as they probably should be. So that's going to be a conversation, I believe, going forward.
And then the other side of that too is you hear the special interest groups saying, well, why is the state of Ohio funding scholarships, education scholarship vouchers for students who don't want to go to a public school? Well, that's totally separately funded. I mean, you have record funding in K through 12, and what winds up happening with their narrative is it's really an attack on parents and families who are also taxpayers, by the way, would like a better fit or a better educational or a safer opportunity for their children. A lot of people are happy with their public schools, without a doubt. But for parents who need an option for their child, this has been an important program. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. And it's worth repeating. That money does not come out of the pocket of the local school district. That money does not come out of the public school funding line item at all. It is a separate line item of funding that the state is independently funding out of its own budgetary, the general revenue fund. So it's a great program. And frankly, this argument that, all public money should go just to public schools. Think of all the other different things that we fund through public money. Medicaid, Medicare at the federal level, food stamps, all that other stuff, that there's no requirement that you go to a public entity for any of that, or that you go to a public hospital rather than a private hospital to get your medical care or anything like that. Choice and competition in any marketplace, including the educational marketplace, is good for people. And I think there was this concern, or maybe this hyperbole, when we've enacted the program and continued to fund it, that it's going to kill public schools. It's going to kill every single kid from the public school is going to go to a private school, and that doesn't happen, because there are a lot of families who have said, I'm perfectly fine with my public school. My public school district is a good school district, et cetera. And there are a lot of communities where the public school district is not all that good. And so are we supposed to be content with allowing students in that community to just simply sit there in a bad school district that hasn't improved for decades? That's not fair to them or those families. They deserve that choice. And even in a good school district, there are plenty of reasons why you would send your child to a different school. Maybe it's religious reasons. Maybe it's class size. There's a variety of reasons to send your kid to a different school. And I like the fact that in Ohio, we acknowledge that these decisions should be made by the parents and the students. And that's all we're doing, is we're empowering the parents through the voucher program to basically say, a school that I may not have been able to afford, or an educational opportunity I may not have been able to offer my child, I now can, because of the voucher program in the state of Ohio.
And that's a really important point. I saw a story, and I kind of wondered if somebody from the left was trying to float the idea. It was a story about the Ed Choice Scholarship Program. And, could that program potentially be a target by these out-of-state groups to run a ballot initiative to challenge and repeal that law in Ohio with a constitutional amendment or whatever it may be? And that's the real danger, too, because we saw the same law firm back before the ballot board last week arguing for, quote, the Voters' Bill of Rights, which does a lot of things, including repealing all the voter ID provisions, I believe, that you and Senator Gavarone were really vital in getting through the legislature. I mean, what is the real danger of Ohio's Constitution you can fund a big campaign. Fortunately, issue 1 was defeated. But if you have $40 million, you have a significant shot at getting your issue into the Ohio Constitution. Is that still a legitimate danger in your opinion?
Well, and this was the reason voters and viewers may recall issue 1 in August of 2023, which became, muddied by the debate concerning issue 1 in November, which was around abortion. And the voting public voted it down, and in large part, I believe, because it was labeled as a way to keep abortion out of Ohio's Constitution. Now, with all of that in mind, I am here to tell you, as the sponsor of the resolution that put that on the ballot, it was not about abortion. It was about the tsunami of dark money that we saw coming over the horizon to really just attack our Constitution. Because there are groups out there with virtually unlimited resources who are doing this across the country, not just in Ohio, across the country. And we've covered it extensively on this podcast, who are going to come back to Ohio again and again and again, trying to get their reforms into the Constitution. That's what this was about, is because we saw $40 million coming over the hill. We're likely going to have another $10 to $40 million campaign in the near future, and you brought up the voting rights amendment, which frankly is going to get rid of many of the changes we've made that have instilled more confidence in our voting system here in Ohio at a time when there are a lot of states who do it the wrong way.
They're still counting votes in California. How can you be doing that
a month later? And they're going to try to put things in place that really are going to attack the integrity of Ohio's voting system. I would say the vast majority of Ohioans look at Ohio's voting system and say, we do it the right way. We know who won the election on election night. It's not hard to vote in Ohio by any means. Yet it's going to be labeled as Ohio is, an overly restrictive. They're going to say Ohio is an overly restrictive voting state, and they're going to get rid of things like voter ID that probably 80% of Ohioans think is a good idea, and it's voters need to be aware they're coming back again.
Well, and across the country too, would you agree that there was a mandate on election night with not only the sweep of basically the sweeping victory of the Electoral College and the popular vote for President Trump and J.D. Vance? What's the importance of having J.D. Vance being from Ohio in your opinion?
It's it's amazing for Ohio, and I think J.D. Vance. And I've been saying this since he was nominated. J.D. Vance and I are about the same age. And I think he really represents kind of the new wave of conservatism or the younger generation's view of conservatism going forward that admittedly has a little bit more of a populist bend to it. He's lived through some of the challenges that I guess my generation has seen, and that there was an economy that really didn't work for us when we were coming out of college. There was also a war overseas that really was fought under false pretenses with many people from my generation. And of course, Vice President-elect J.D. Vance served overseas in that war. And so that perspective, I think, is going to be well received among people who are, around our age, 50, 40, and even 30 and under, as somebody who's not just going to go along to get along because it's always been the way that it's happened. It's okay to challenge the old institutional way of doing things. And I think that goes hand in hand with President Trump's mindset as well. It's that the system that we have in place fundamentally needs changed. The federal government, as it's set up right now, regardless of who's in power, is not working the way that it should. And I look forward to the reform-minded mindset that they have and seeing the changes that they're going to make. And it's going to be an entertaining 4 years, I think.
Less government means more money in your pocket.
Yes.
Drain the swamp, drain the level of bureaucracy, things that we've been doing here in Ohio to try to reduce the size of government or regulatory reform, and to encourage people that you don't have to move through hoop after hoop or this red tape or that just to try to get a permit to do something. So yes, last thought, Ohio a red state?
Ohio has certainly been a state that's been trending more red, and I think that's universally true across the state, but it's true especially in the eastern side of the state, the Mahoning Valley, the Ohio River Valley, 2 Senate districts that we have that we didn't have 10 years ago. They were in Democrat hands, and they're areas of the state that have shifted 30 or 40 points to the right, arguably more than any other place in the country. And I think that's allowed us to get a firm hold of some of the seats and be able to represent the people of Ohio with a conservative policy mindset going forward. And I think overall, obviously, that's going to benefit all of Ohioans.
President-elect of the Ohio Senate, the next president of the 136th General Assembly starting in January, Senator Rob McColley. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, John.
Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.